They said she was holy, untouchable, the living flame of Rome. 6 priests, all men, declared she had looked at someone too long. So they dressed her in white, led her to a hole in the ground, and called it mercy. She died for love. They called it faith. Rome worshipped fire, not for warmth, but for control. At the heart of the forum, a flame burned without end. They said it protected the empire, but only if the virgins kept it alive. 6 girls, chosen before they even bled, locked in a temple, told their body belonged to Vesta and to no man. They were not allowed to cry, not allowed to touch, not allowed to feel. Their purity wasn't for the gods. It was for Rome's men, to look at, parade, and fear. And if the fire ever went out, someone would have to burn for it. They called it an honor. But the girls didn't ask for it. Fathers offered their daughters, not for faith, for status. The younger, the better. Unblemished, silent, obedient. They stood in line before the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's high priest, always a man, and waited to be judged, like livestock. If chosen, they were taken immediately. No goodbyes, no questions. From that moment, they belonged to Vesta, to the temple, to the law, and if they ever broke the vow, if they ever loved, death would not be quick, or private, or forgotten. They called it a palace, marble halls, gilded altars, but there were no exits. No door was locked, because none of them could leave. The girls lived under constant eyes. Priests, guards, older Vestals. Even the walls listened. They woke before the city stirred, prayed before the sun rose, and never spoke of dreams. Every movement had rules, every look was measured. Even their steps had to be silent, controlled, unprovoking. Laughter was dangerous. Tears were treason. And if one girl made a mistake, the others paid with suspicion. Guilt, by association, was holy law. At night they slept in silence, not because they were tired, but because they were watched. Rome called it sacred, but it was something else, a prison made of obedience. To Rome, their purity was priceless, but it was never theirs to own. As long as they were untouched, they could speak in court, pardon criminals, ride in carriages no man could enter. Men bowed to them in public, but still decided their fate in private. Their power was conditional, fragile, performative. The moment their chastity was questioned, everything was revoked. They were no longer divine. They were dangerous. A virgin who stayed silent was sacred. A virgin who desired was a threat. Rome didn't fear sex. It feared women who chose it. So they wrapped these girls in white, put them on pedestals, and reminded them daily that the moment they disobeyed, their bodies would become evidence of sin, of treason, of impurity, and no God would save them. It started with a glance. He was just a soldier, one of hundreds stationed near the temple. She passed him during a procession. Her eyes met his. 2 seconds too long, that was enough. The guards noticed. So did the high priest, so did the other girls. No words were spoken, but everyone saw it. She tried to pray harder, walk slower, smile less, but the suspicion had already spread like smoke in a locked room. They watched her every step. They counted her breaths. They questioned her purity, not because of what she did, but because of what she might have wanted. In Rome, desire wasn't a crime, but for a Vestal, it was grounds for execution. They called it a ritual, a sacred inquiry, a holy examination. But it was an interrogation, and she was the suspect. No torture, just questions, asked by priests in silk robes, men who'd never taken vows of purity themselves. They asked about her prayers, her posture, her sleep. Did she speak to men? Did she dream? Did her body ever betray her? There was no proof. There never was. Only a pattern of fear, and a temple desperate to protect its illusion. She answered with silence. She answered with tears. But in Rome, a crying virgin was not seen as innocent. She was seen as guilty, just not yet condemned. They never called it love. They called it impiety, a failure to remain sacred, a failure to be still. She wasn't accused of touching, or kissing, or sinning. She was accused of feeling. The charge was spiritual betrayal, a threat to the city's divine protection, a danger to the flame. Rome could survive war. It could survive famine. But it could not survive a Vestal with a heart. The verdict was already forming, not in law but in whispers. The temple had to act. Because if one virgin could want, then maybe they all could. And that fear, not her love, was the true scandal. She swore she was innocent. No man had touched her. No vow had been broken. But it didn't matter, because her body wasn't hers. It belonged to the goddess, to the temple, to the state, and the state was suspicious. They examined her steps, her sleep, her skin. They said she blinked too fast, that her voice trembled, that her silence was too loud. She prayed harder, ate less, spoke only when asked, but the walls had ears, and the ears had already decided. In Rome, a woman's purity was never hers to prove. It was only theirs to doubt. There was no trial, only a vote. 6 priests, 1 Pontifex Maximus, all men, all holy. They sat behind stone walls, surrounded by incense and silence. They claimed the goddess had spoken, but no one heard her voice. She wasn't allowed inside the chamber. She wasn't allowed to speak. They called it sacred deliberation. But the verdict was sealed before the meeting began. One said her eyes had changed. One said her walk lacked grace. One said, nothing. He just nodded. By sundown, the sentence was unanimous. Not exile, not prison, death. Not because they found her guilty, but because they needed her gone. Rome couldn't afford uncertainty. The flame must remain pure, and purity could not be questioned. So they did what Rome always did to silence a threat. They covered it in ritual, wrapped it in marble, and called it justice. They couldn't spill her blood. That was the law. A Vestal was sacred, too holy to be executed like a common criminal. So Rome found a way around its conscience. They built a chamber beneath the city. A small stone room, no windows, 1 stairway down. They placed bread, water, and a single oil lamp inside, then called it mercy. They would not kill her, they said. They would simply leave her, alone, until the gods made their decision. But Rome knew the gods would not come. This was not about faith. It was about optics. Killing her in public would make people ask questions. So they buried her in private to preserve the illusion. She was paraded in silence, dressed in white, then lowered into the earth. No rope, no screams, no blood, just dust, and a city pretending to be clean. The city watched. They always did. She was dressed in white, not like a bride, but like an offering. 2 guards on each side, a priest in front, the people behind them, silent, no chains, no cries, just slow, deliberate steps through the forum. Children were told not to look, but they looked anyway. Some said she walked with grace, others said she trembled. None of it mattered. This was not a walk to justice. It was a ritual, a performance to reassure the crowd that Rome still controlled its women, its gods, its shame. She passed the temple of Vesta, the flame still burning, but she would not light it again. When she reached the entrance to the chamber, no one touched her. No one spoke. She stepped down the stairs alone, and for a moment, Rome felt pure again. Not because she was innocent, but because she was gone. The door closed behind her. No locks, no guards, just a slab of stone pulled into place. The chamber was barely larger than a prison cell. One loaf of bread, a jug of water, an oil lamp flickering in the corner. That was Rome's definition of compassion. She looked up, but there was no sky, only silence. No priest spoke her name. No prayer was offered. In the end, not even the gods came. They called it tradition, said she was being returned to the earth, that the goddess would judge her. But the goddess had been silent since the beginning. They left her with symbols, not mercy. A lamp to delay the dark, a meal to delay the end, a ritual to delay their guilt. She wasn't killed, not officially. She just stopped existing. So Rome could keep pretending it was pure. No one was supposed to hear her, but someone did. A guard claimed she whispered a name, a single word, soft, almost inaudible before the stone slid into place. They never recorded it. Too dangerous. Because if she had loved someone, if she had spoken his name aloud, then this wasn't just impiety. It was memory. It was proof. Rome feared proof, so the records said nothing. Just that she accepted her fate, that she descended calmly, that she said no last words, but the story spread anyway, that she had fallen in love, not with a senator, not with a god, but with a soldier, someone below her station, someone forbidden, someone human. The name was lost, but the whisper remained, and for centuries, Rome would keep punishing girls for the crime of remembering too much. The stone slid into place. No ceremony, no chant, just weight-crushing air, light, and memory. She didn't scream, or maybe she did. No one would admit to hearing it. Above ground, the priests turned away. The guards resumed their posts. The city exhaled. It was done. The silence wasn't sacred. It was staged. A silence that told the people Rome had acted justly, that no gods had been offended, that the world would go on. But beneath the earth, she waited, with nothing but dust, flickering oil, and a name in her mouth. There would be no tombstone, no mourning, only a line in a scroll. Executed for impiety. Nothing more. They buried her to keep the peace, to protect the myth, and in doing so, they made her unforgettable, because the fire didn't die with her. It just moved underground. Rome called it purification, not punishment, not murder, not fear. They said the flame was clean again, that the gods had accepted her sacrifice, that order had been restored, temples held offerings, senators gave speeches, poets wrote about sacred discipline, but none of them went near the chamber. None of them said her name. She had been erased publicly, deliberately. Because the story was never really about her. It was about control, a warning to other girls, a reminder to the city. That power was never yours. Even if they draped you in white, even if they knelt at your feet, even if they called you divine, you were a vessel, and once you leaked desire, you were disposable. Rome did not worship women. It worshipped silence, and it buried anyone who broke it. They never charged him. The soldier she looked at, the man who may or may not have loved her back, disappeared. No trial, no records, no name. Some said he was reassigned to the front. Others said he was quietly executed, but most believed he was paid to vanish. because punishing him would mean admitting something happened, and Rome couldn't afford that. To preserve the myth, he had to become no one. Only the Vestal could be guilty. Only she had something to lose. He was a man, a soldier. His desire was expected. Hers was treason. So the temples said nothing. The priests moved on, and the city forgot him. But some remembered that she didn't fall alone, that even in silence she was not the only one who burned. They erased his name, not to protect him, but to protect themselves. That night, the flame flickered. Some said it was the wind. Others said it was her soul. But in the temple of Vesta, where the eternal fire was meant to burn without fail, the light dimmed. For a moment, it went dark. The priests panicked. They relit it in silence. No one was allowed to speak of it. But the rumor spread faster than any decree, that her death had not pleased the gods, that maybe she had been innocent, or worse, chosen as a scapegoat. Rome denied everything. They blamed faulty oil. They called it a coincidence. But the people whispered, not about her impurity, but about their guilt. The city that once worshipped control felt a flicker of doubt. Because if the flame could die, even for a second, what else had they been wrong about? She was gone. But for the first time, Rome looked at its own reflection and flinched. She was gone by morning. By evening, another girl was chosen. The ceremony was simple. A name read aloud. A father nodding with pride. A daughter too young to understand. The city applauded. The priest smiled. It was called continuity. She entered the temple in white. The same marble halls. The same rules. She bowed at the altar, not knowing who had died beneath it. They didn't tell her. They never did. But the silence lingered, heavier than stone. The older Vestals watched her, kindly, carefully. They had seen what happened to the last girl. They had memorized the signs. They would not let it happen again. Or so they thought, because nothing changed. Rome still needed its symbols, still demanded obedience. So more were chosen, more were trained, and more were watched. Not for what they did, but for what they might one day feel. Her name is lost, but her statue remains. In the Roman Forum, where tourists now sip espresso and take photos, she still stands. Not her exactly, but what she was meant to represent. A Vestal virgin, carved in white marble, veiled, serene, silent. No plaque mentions the burial chamber. No guidebook describes the ritual. They speak of purity, of devotion, of Rome's glorious faith. But the stone remembers. It remembers the girls taken too young, the men who judged without mercy, the mouths silenced beneath the ground. She is just a statue now, but her eyes still look downward, as if watching something the rest of the world refuses to see. People walk past. Some stop. None ask who she was, because Rome doesn't mourn her. It preserves her, like a trophy. Not of virtue, but of obedience made beautiful. They called her holy, a vessel of the divine, a symbol of Roman virtue, an emblem of discipline and faith. But she was none of those things. She was a girl, chosen too early, trained to disappear inside her own body. She didn't break a law. She broke an illusion. She felt something. And that was enough. Enough to condemn her. Enough to bury her. Enough to pretend she never existed. Rome remembered the ritual, the marble, the vow, but not her. Not the way she blinked when nervous. Not the way she folded her hands too tightly. Not the way she paused before prayer. They remembered the role, not the person. Because to them she was never meant to be real. But she was. And before the stone sealed her fate, she loved. Not loudly, not dangerously, just enough to be killed for it.